Then what we're going to do, is we are going to ask our friends from Skills USA to present to you what they do with related to schools, in-school training for students. We were going to have Amanda Gwynn participate, but Amanda's not able to join. So we will try to make sure that she can join in our October meeting, which might be good. It might be a good way to have that like refresher of talking about in school before we go into the out of school. And then we'll do a question and answer. So if you have questions for Eric and Chris, please make sure that you write those down. We have a few questions here just to, for thought-provoking, but please think of your own questions that you would want to ask to Eric and Chris. And then we'll talk about next steps when we get to the end. So with that, let's toss it to Sarah for a roll call.
Yeah. All right. Okay, y'all, I'm just gonna read the names in the Zoom list as they appear to me, and Molly will mark it down. If you don't hear your name, just go ahead and throw it in the chat, okay? So I have Craig Kissinger, Marcy Johnson, Nina Tangman, Kenneth Williams, Mike Massey, Molly Cook, Lee Reese, John Furr, Eric Hill, Chris Anderson, Molly Dowling, Eric Grebner, Antoinette Golden, Whitney Thompson, Shannon Hampton, Suzette Shaw, Jasmine, and Mark Lohman. And again, if you didn't hear your name called, just throw it in the chat and we'll make sure that you're marked as present.
So again, today, as we think about our timeline that we had talked about previously, we're in the area of identifying the barriers for opportunity youth to access career pathways. And one of the conversations that we had last meeting was we wanted to make sure that we looked at in-school youth as well as out-of-school youth, which is why we've invited our presenters today to just help give us a view of where we're at in our support for those students. This is a reminder of the barriers that we said in our meeting in August. We talked about transportation being a barrier. We talked about the justice involvement, those students that are in correctional facilities who can't get involved, even the students that are like in alternative schools, thinking about those students. Foster care students, there's a barrier for those students. The teacher shortage is a big barrier into supporting our students and getting the knowledge that they need. Special populations, of course, or not of course, but I mean, you know, because that is one of our areas of concern anyway, is that these students are struggling to meet the basic classes, and how do we support them with work-based learning? We know that another barrier is just lack of career awareness and lack of parent involvement. And how do we change that from lack of to just career awareness? The graduation requirements for in-school youth. There's not enough scheduling provided for work-based learning, so students can't get that all into their schedule to be able to do work-based learning. And then just school counselors, that lack of capacity and the support that school counselors need to help students know a way to know about the different career pathways. And Eric, yes, we will share this recording as well as the PowerPoint. Any questions on the barriers before we go into the next? Did we miss anything? Everybody on the same page with that? Okay. So next we want to introduce Eric Hill and Chris Anderson to talk to us about Skills USA and their support for in-school youth. So with that, remember that if you have any questions, put that in the chat. And we'll try to discuss as many as we can. If not, we will do a FAQ afterwards.
All right, thanks, Marcy. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Hill. I'm the Executive Director of Skills USA Illinois. Also with us today is Chris Anderson. He's the Associate Director of Skills USA Illinois. And what we want to talk to you a little bit about today is some of the programming that we currently offer within Skills USA specific to in-school youth, and really looking at how some of the different organizations that we partner with, whether that's through grants or just direct relationships, maybe some of those barriers that we encounter. So it's less about the barrier to the end participant, but more about the barriers that we face as we're trying to get to that end student and creating that end product and with that end product in mind. So at a high level, I'll start by explaining Skills USA and kind of where we got to where we're at today. Then I'm going to turn it over to Chris to explain a couple of the specific grants that we're operating under and kind of the goals and objectives of those grants. And then finally, we'll get into some of the barriers that we've identified or want to address specifically. So Skills USA, we're a student-based organization. We're a nationwide student organization that services about 330,000 students nationwide. And our focus is to help students enter the workforce by preparing them with personal, workplace, and technical skills. A lot of those skill sets that we develop for our students have been done historically through our Skills USA championships. That's where we bring in business and industry partners from all over the country. They come in together to help our students experience hands-on real-world simulations through the form of competitions. That's in everything from cosmetology to construction to automotive service, healthcare, public safety, about 130 career areas in total. We rely on a very large network of industry partners to help us put those competitions on. And those industry partners, about 5 or 6 years ago, really started coming back to us and saying, you know, we're helping prepare these students. They're great technical skilled students, but how do we get them from the championships and from the CT classes into our workforce? How do we get them into our companies? And so we started piloting a program with insurance auto auctions. And the focus of that program was really to bring students that were in high school into insurance auto auctions and into their facilities across the state of Illinois and put students into some hands-on technical experience. Through that program, we ended up putting about 500 students through that internship-based program over a 2.5-year window. And then as we began to look to expand, we ran into a quick barrier. And that barrier was students under the age of 18. How do we get them into some more high-risk career fields, such as construction, such as manufacturing? And I'm sure that's a barrier that many of us have faced if you've ever tried to experience or ever worked with getting students into the workforce. And so we started doing some exploration around how we can overcome that obstacle. And with the help of actually John Deere, who is leading the way in youth apprenticeship opportunities, we learned about the Department of Labor's Registered Apprenticeship Program and specifically opportunities that it gives to youth. And so the Department of Labor's Registered Apprenticeship will actually allow you to, if you have a certified Department of Labor Registered Apprenticeship Program, you can actually enroll students as young as 16 years of age into some into some traditional job skill or into traditional jobs that they may not be eligible for. It also gives a relief to employers on the insurance side that prevents prevents insurance companies from forbidding or preventing you from hiring those students. It also doesn't allow them to raise work comp rates or anything like that through a registered apprenticeship program. One of the things that we learned from John Deere, as John Deere looked at, they were running their registered apprenticeship program inside their manufacturing facilities in Davenport, Iowa. So they actually pull from a small subset of Illinois and also from Iowa. That's where their student population is coming from. But as they looked and saw the need for this exact type of programming in their dealership network, they also found that they found that their dealers had a very similar need. Can they get more technicians? And maybe this youth registered apprenticeship program would be a solution for them. But one of the obstacles that they ran into was as they started training and helping their dealer network to learn how to develop and maintain their own registered apprenticeship program, the dealers kind of pushed back to corporate and said, that it's really very cumbersome. There's a lot of red tape that goes along with certifying and having your own registered apprenticeship program. So through conversations with John Deere and with some of the dealerships that John Deere had, Skills USA realized or saw an opportunity to support our industry partners in not only helping them with facilitation of creation of registered apprenticeship programs, but actually acting as an intermediary between the two. So we actually are helping our employers and registering our employers underneath our registered apprenticeship program. And that allows them to focus on hiring students and developing these registered apprentices, and really working with the student and developing their skill sets, but taking some of that burden and some of the responsibility of tracking and managing the related technical instruction and all of the other components that go with the registered apprenticeship program. So through all of this process, quite honestly, the registered apprenticeship program, we really focused in on that during COVID. So COVID gave us a great opportunity to kind of pause everything we were doing and really focus on how we could develop this programming for our students. And then once we got back into somewhat normal cycle, we were able to start offering this apprenticeship opportunities to our employers. So currently we have a mixture of both full-blown registered apprenticeship offerings and pre-apprenticeship offerings. In total, we have about 200 students across both of those offerings that are active in that program. And that has led us to being able to apply for a few grants. And Chris, I'll turn it over to Chris to kind of explain a couple of those grants.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Anderson, like Eric said. Yeah, the COVID really gave us the opportunity to explore our registered apprenticeship program, but then also look at our grant opportunities as well as how we're going to make this self-sustaining and self-funded, because we did not want to put a burden onto our employers or onto our student members to be able to facilitate this for them. So as we looked at different grant opportunities through DCEO, we applied for several grants and we're fortunate to receive 2 and are working through another negotiation currently. One of which was our Youth Career Pathways grant that's currently offered. So with that grant right now, we are only putting students into an apprenticeship program. So that's what that sole grant for us is focused on. So we're working with 24 WIOA eligible youth between ages 16 and 18 to get them placed in careers within the automotive, manufacturing, and as well as welding fields within the Central Illinois area. So that would be East Peoria, Eureka, Morton, and Pekin are the areas we're currently focused in for that grant. When we look at outcomes for that, students are receiving placement into that Department of Labor registered apprenticeship. They also are receiving an industry recognized credential that's actually being certified through the employer, is actually the one that's delivering that instruction. And then they're also receiving an employability skill development credential that we offer through Skills USA. Our current status within that Youth Career Pathways grant is about 19 youth. So then as we look at our other grant opportunity, this is through the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program that's specifically targeting Morton and Pekin community high schools. Through that grant, what we're doing is working with their construction trades programs to get them prepared to enter an apprenticeship, whether that would be a union apprenticeship or a non-union apprenticeship. So what they're doing is they're going through a curriculum called NCCER. So they're receiving a core credential is what that's called, getting them ready to enter that field, as well as an employability skill development credential through us and an OSHA 10 certification. So we just wrapped up cohort 1. So we got a very large chunk of students through that cohort. And then as we moved into cohort 2, which we're doing this fall, we've actually seen a 150% growth in both of those programs. So students who are interested in coming back and getting more involved with those programs and continuing to grow them. So the purpose of the grants was to get more students towards apprenticeships, and that's what we're doing with a lot of these grants that we're servicing right now. Eric, anything you would add on to that?
No, I'll just look at a couple of the questions that were asked. So specifically, what job titles for our DOL registered apprenticeship? So currently we have 23 occupation codes that have been approved by the Department of Labor. That's everything from diesel equipment technician, automotive, culinary arts, early childhood education, healthcare, emergency service technician, welding technician. Chris, do you? I can get the entire list. but to be honest, let's see who asked that. Molly, what we're doing currently is as our employers are coming to us with particular job codes that they need, as long as we have a subset of students within Skills USA that we service that are relative to that field, we're adding those job codes. So we have about 40 other job codes right now that we're evaluating with different employers. But we're really trying, our hope is to have all 130 of our career areas added as a job code within the next year. Our hope was honestly to have it done by this time, but it's kind of a taxing process. In fact, right before this call, Chris had just sent off an email to our Department of Labor contact adding another version of a diesel equipment technology or technician job code to help a very specific industry. So that's something that we're definitely developing. As we're meeting with employers, that's definitely not an obstacle for us to add on an employer to the program. We're getting those added for them, just kind of on an as needed basis. The other thing I wanted to mention is the reason we brought up specifically the Youth Career Pathways grant. Next in October, we're going to hear from Homework Hangout. And Homework Hangout is actually another recipient of this grant, but specific to out-of-school youth. So I think it'll be great to hear a little bit about what we're doing and some of the barriers that we face as an in-school youth support program versus some of the barriers that Homework Hangout will hear or will experience as an out-of-school support service, and kind of how they're intertwining or braiding some different funding opportunities that they have to help support an even larger objective. So before we jump into our barriers specifically, are there any other questions about our registered apprenticeship program, the two specific grants that we have, or some of the work that we're doing?
Eric, can you touch a little bit more on the insurance piece? I know that is always a big issue for anybody that we've heard from. They'll say, well, we can't, our insurance won't let us. And it would be interesting to know just a little bit more about that, or maybe that's where your barriers are coming in at. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously the biggest barriers that we face. So I will say this will be kind of a long answer to a very simple question, Marcy, but I'm going to kind of flip this a little bit. Obviously, our number one focus is to prepare our student members and give them the absolute best success. But when we're looking at this particular program, specifically the Registered Apprenticeship Program, it really is an employer-centric program. It's how can we support our employers to create a system, an ecosystem that's going to let us build the best opportunities for our students, and then how do we connect those students to those opportunities? So we sit down with employers. In fact, last week, I think I talked to probably 6 different employers through this process. And this is Fortune 500 companies all the way down to mom and pop companies that all have that exact same concern. They've heard for so long that there's child labor laws and there's insurance regulations around hiring students. We are very thankful that we had a lot of support from John Deere. John Deere did a lot of the research for us on child labor laws and also on insurance law that really helped give us a lot of ammunition. David Ottavanelli at John Deere, he's kind of the guru behind the youth apprenticeship offerings at John Deere. He took that all the way through his corporate legal team, and it passed. He has actually changed John Deere's corporate hiring practices to bring it down to 16 years old if you're in a registered apprenticeship program. So currently there's 2 barriers to hiring youth, and that's going to be child labor laws. And so child labor law, there is a specific clause within the child labor laws that outlines specifically Department of Labor's registered apprenticeship program. So if you have an employee that's in a recognized program, that immediately allows you to hire them as young as 16 years of age and basically exempts you from all other restrictions within the under 18 child labor law statute. The only exception to that is there are some jobs that you still cannot participate with. So for instance, you can't be a forklift operator as your primary job. You can't, there's like 6 or 7 key areas that you can't do as your core job. But other than that, child labor laws basically open the door for Department of Labor's Registered Apprenticeship Program. And the reason for that is that the Department of Labor is looking at it and saying, not only is the job site secured and safe for that apprentice, but the Department of Labor is also recognizing and credentialing or acknowledging the education that that student is receiving. So because that student is getting and receiving education in their career field that they're working in, and because that's certified by an independent source, so in this case, it's us certifying the high school or the community college the student is receiving instruction from, and it meets the standards that we've outlined in our job code that Molly had referenced earlier. Because we have all of those standards outlined and we know exactly what the student's learning and we know exactly what they're going to be doing on the job, the Department of Labor is comfortable with that. The other big component is insurance. So we have yet to have an insurance company, as soon as we say that this is a registered apprenticeship program, come back with any sort of argument or contradiction to that. And that's because it is in insurance, it's federal insurance law that prevents them from changing the rate or forbidding to insure an employer based on the fact that they're hiring someone into a registered apprenticeship program under the age of 16. So we have statutes and all of the research that John Deere has done for both of those areas, and I'd be happy to share it with anyone that's interested in that program. But we have had absolutely no kickback or no pushback from any of our company's insurance providers once we tell them we're in a registered apprenticeship program. The other big benefit to our employers is, and the other thing that we're trying to bring to the table to overcome some barriers, is there are a lot of organizations, there's a lot of funding out there, whether it's WIOA funding, whether it's some sort of continuing education credits, where there's so many funding opportunities out there that I don't think employers are aware of, that we're able to, we're not providing those funding, but we're able to help those employers as they're coming into our registered apprenticeship program learn about opportunities, whether it's incumbent worker training, whether it's financial assistance, or even just supporting employees that have barriers that exist. Some of the very barriers that we listed earlier in this slide deck, that, you know, there's already funding sources out there and available. And I think that's one of the things that Chris and I are going to discuss once we get to some of our barriers is, you know, helping to ensure that we're removing barriers from all levels of the support system, not just looking at how we remove the same barriers, just from multiple different ways or multiple different entities trying to remove the same barrier. Let me read this question real quick. John, would you mind expanding on that a little bit on what you mean there?
Sure, yeah. So, you know, there's been a lot of work at the state level through ISB and state agencies and in legislation to define specific work-based learning experiences along the continuum. So there's a state definition for career exploration and for team-based challenges and career development experiences, which tie into some of the regulatory expectations for Perkins and for other state laws. And I'm just curious what extent Skills USA is kind of packaging your services, you know, in a way that actually aligns to those definitions, so that districts know, all right, this is a career development experience. It ties to the college and career pathway endorsement. So that helps my students meet the expectations for House Bill 3296 to just get past this, those types of things. But just curious if you guys have gone through that sort of alignment process around your offerings.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
You can jump in on that one. Okay.
Yeah, so I think really where we're looking at it is the registered apprenticeship piece is obviously the capstone experience, right? That is full-fledged employment. So when we're looking at career exploration and really career exploration, a lot of those barriers have been removed through career exploration because the students aren't doing some of those high-skill, high-risk jobs. Obviously, the team-based challenges, that is Skills USA in a nutshell. That is our technical competition. So bringing students into those opportunities. But really what the registered apprenticeship piece that we're talking about here is that capstone, full-fledged work experience for those students. That now students that do complete the registered apprenticeship program, that is a credential from the Department of Labor. But in all reality, it's very unlikely that a student would ever complete the registered apprenticeship program while in high school. So I think that's the other big barrier that we have, is as students are in a 3 or 4 year registered apprenticeship program, we have to have an organization that can track students beyond from high school into community college or whatever steps come next in their life. And so that's why it really serves us well as Skills USA to be that service provider. And really, I think that's where even some community colleges struggle to provide that support service, because once a student leaves that 2 year university, or 2-year degree program, it's hard for that community college to continue that tracking plan. So I don't know if I answered your question
Yeah, it's
specifically,
not really, and I'd love to follow up with you guys, because what you're doing in high school likely meets the state definition for career development experience, which districts are really working hard to scale up and to offer. But unless you're unless you're aligning to the specific components of that definition and helping them walk through it, they may not realize that or realize the benefit of your program to meet that other criteria that State Board of Ed and that other organizations like ours have set up to help administer it. So we would be happy to kind of talk offline with you guys, but I think there might be some opportunities for better alignment around the work you're doing to that state criteria and structure.
absolutely. No, thank you very much. And Craig, what your question, FL, what is that?
Forklift. So you use the example of forklift because the statute talks about hazardous jobs, but really doesn't go into a lot of detail about what that means. I know we've talked to our insurance carrier and we're allowed to start training high school students using our overhead cranes, right? So if you do it in a safe environment, what defines hazardous work environment, and where you said they can't have forklift necessarily as their core job, could that be a part of their job?
Yeah, it depends really.
Yeah,
Eric, you got it, or do you want me to? Okay, so it really depends on the job code, Craig. We can look at across the board and see the specific job description aligning to which job code it is. As long as it's under a certain percentage of their job and they're being, there's a little bit more, I would say, hand-holding in that process to get them ready to go. As long as it falls underneath that and it's not their primary function, yes, like forklift operating, crane operating is allowed under some of that as well.
That makes sense, given that they're working with welders and
Yeah,
bandsaws and other.
surprisingly less regulation around welding than forklifts, but
Yep.
We're not here to talk about that.
So I think the next thing we're going to start jumping into some of the barriers specifically that we face. So again, we're going to look at this from the barriers that our organization has faced and it's not even meant to be negative or combative in any way, just where our programmatic objectives as we look at how we can take our students and enter them into the next step of their career path versus funding opportunities and other support systems through other agencies that maybe don't align well or maybe create duplicate or overlapping work. So one of the very simple barriers that we face is we're on several grants with DCEO that are on a January 1 to December 31st timeline. That is a very hard window for us to operate when we're operating on a school calendar year. Seems very simple, seems very obvious, but when we're writing programmatic or program goals for a grant versus program goals with our school systems, it is a very odd cycle. I know Kenneth is on this call, so Kenneth is our grant administrator for YCP, and that was one of those grants where it's an incredible opportunity, but when the funding started versus when we got the green light to go versus when we actually could start programming, we were towards more end of February or March to try to get something done by the end of May, or at least get students into that program, because once May hits, we're going to lose those students for summer break. So just the ability to find ways to either overlap, align, or create some consistency specific for programs that are trying to serve in-school youth. I think that's a barrier for us that maybe isn't completely obvious to either entity, but obviously working very much against each other when we're writing plans and trying to figure out ways to make those overlap. Chris, I'll let you take academic assessment.
Yeah, so one of the other barriers that we found is academic assessment and holistic needs criteria that's written into some of these grants. So specifically, when we start talking a little bit about our YCP grant, we were required to do academic assessment, so CASAS or TAB testing to enroll students in the program. And even if students could place out of that. So majority of our students, because they are in-school youth, are not showing deficits in academic assessments. However, they may face another barrier for WIOA eligibility. But really the academic assessment was the only, I guess, requirement that we had to prove eligibility that everyone had to take no matter what. So if we could look at, for in-school youth, looking at other opportunities to prove their academic ability, or I guess prove their academic level and if they would qualify for that. Not that it was hard on, it was a barrier, but it wasn't that it was hard on us, but we were asking students to take a 3 or 4 hour test outside of school to prove their academic ability to be able to be eligible for the grant. We also have a lot of review and reporting that we have to do of support and wraparound services for in-school youth. So as we're looking at what we're providing, we don't want to duplicate what the school is doing. So when we're looking at support services that they may be receiving because they are a student that has a IEP plan or something like that, we don't want to have to be reinventing that wheel on our end within our office when we're there to help get them into an apprenticeship program and they're already getting that service at their school. So there was a lot of grant reporting and data tracking we had to do that seemed duplicate for in-school youth, and completely get and understand the need for out-of-school youth and needing those services, but in-school youth, it seemed to be already managed within the school system. Eric, do you want me to talk about marketing as well?
Yes, please.
Great. And then one of the other barriers that we've seen is for grants that are, our grants have all been focused on in-school youth. However, a lot of our grant requirements have come with requirements to post flyers, create flyers, post social media, or make web postings for public facing projects, basically saying that this is open to anyone who wants to be involved with it, when really our target is specific in-school youth. So it's not a barrier, it's just something else that our office has had to do that really was a question mark, I would say, for a lot of people, is we already know what student pool we're going for. Why are we creating public facing marketing material as a requirement for the grant? And then the other part with that too was reporting on targeted demographics that we were reaching out to. And it's been good conversations that we've had with our grant managers and things like that around this, but when we're servicing a population that does not have specific demographics, or they just don't have them within the school system that they work within, that's where we start to feel a little bit that we're trying to not make up, but find data to support our grants and support the work that we're doing. And that's not really what we want to, that's time, effort that we don't want to get into, is trying to prove that we've reached out to X percentage population of student to try to market this program when that school doesn't have that percentage of population for us to reach out to. And Eric, do you want to get into that?
Yeah, so Molly brought up a couple of things. I agree that the argument for a 2-year grant makes complete sense because that would give us time, again, leave the January to December 31 window, but make it a 2-year window. Makes perfect sense because that gives us time to onboard the grant, prepare the grant, really kick the grant off in August, run it for 1 full calendar year, and then have some follow-up going. So yeah, that's kind of what we were getting at with that point, but obviously I completely agree with you there. In-school youth grants, I see a lot of heads nodding as we're talking through some of these issues that we faced. So I'm assuming a lot of your organizations have worked with these in the past. I'll be honest, this is very new for us. Grant funding has not ever been something that our organization has looked at. But when we were looking at registered apprenticeship program and really what we could offer, and of each kind of proof of concept to show our industry partners that this works, to show that our schools that this program works, it was a new avenue for us to pursue. So some of these things that your organizations have probably faced for years in the past, we're very new at it. So some of these barriers, again, probably have been around for a long time, but we're addressing them or wanting to at least bring to the forefront what we've seen. But yes, identifying eligibility for in-school youth is incredibly difficult. Quite honestly, Molly, what we have to do is we have to bring those students into our office and do a very intensive interview with them over multiple periods of time to even get the answers to figure out if they would be eligible. Then once we find out we think they are eligible, it's how do we get that criteria, data, or supporting paperwork to prove that they are. The majority of our work that we're doing is less around supporting our students in the actual registered apprenticeship program. When it comes to our YCP grantees, it's really more so ensuring that we have the appropriate documentation, paperwork to justify those dollars being spent. So that's actually going to be one of our last barriers that we're going to discuss, is programmatic barriers versus programmatic goals versus serving the grant needs. And I'm going to put it to a very simple concept of like, we either teach to the test or we teach the concepts of what students want to learn. And sadly, what we learned very quickly is there's a lot of grant responsibilities where we have to teach to the test, right? We have to change our initial path. Our path was very focused, and we're saying like, this is what we want to do for this population of students. These are our goals, these are our outcomes. And then you are awarded a grant, and then you're given this wonderful grant manual, and suddenly everything changes in your life, right? You have to now do all of these other steps that you weren't expecting or weren't prepared for, which is fine. But we are seeing a lot of effort being put more towards checking boxes and completing steps within our grant, and less time actually servicing and honestly getting the feedback that we want from both our employer and our student on how this grant is functioning for them. At the end of the day, I wish we could spend 20 or 30 hours over the course of our grant with every one of our students and employers to get 360 evaluations to say, you know, student or employer, what is it that you didn't know going into this job that would have helped you in your high school career that we could then take back to the schools and help prepare you or prepare the next student entering this program. Instead, we're doing eligibility verifications and, oh no, I'm sorry, this piece of mail doesn't work, so please give us another piece of mail. And those things are true barriers that we're finding. And if this group could find a way to not ease the regulatory requirements, but find a recommendation to where we could simplify processes where we could focus on the work we're all trying to do, I think our students would be better off. So I'll get off my soapbox for a second and look at a couple of other questions. Yeah, Kenneth, thank you very much. So I know Kenneth and Chris and has talked to our team has talked to Kenneth on a regular basis on just some of these barriers that we've run into. So thank you, Kenneth, for adding that comment. Chris, do you want to talk about any of the other servicing needs versus overall grant performance barriers?
Yeah, and I think you said it really well, Eric, but looking at, how we fit grant requirements, I just wanted to share one more perfect example of this is, our organization went out, we hired professionals to write really good evaluations for students to give us the data that we really needed. Really good for employers, for students, for parents. We had professional surveys crafted, data-based and research-based surveys sent out and created. And then this was not necessarily YCP. This is in some of our other grants that we're working with as well. They created their own, and they're very generic that can be serviced across all areas. And in order to alleviate the work that our employers are doing, we had to go with their surveys. But then we're still also not getting the data that we had. And we asked if we could, align or show crosswalk or do something. And it was kind of, hey, you have to follow what the grant requires. So that was just one example I would add on that. But we really want to just make sure that we're servicing, overall program goals that our organization has overall that we've, spent 60 years developing research on and trying to come up with what this looks like for our students and the best outcome for our employers versus I would say, just making sure that we're meeting grant guidelines, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure we're putting the best students out there, not, fulfilling a grant requirement at this. We want to do both at the same time, but really getting our best student out there for the best employer. And Eric, it looks like Greg asked a question as well.
Let me see. I'm not seeing that question.
So barriers specific to Illinois versus how they're handled in other states.
Oh. Yeah, it looks like Kenneth might have just answered to that. Kenneth, can you actually speak to that? Because I'm not sure on how it's handled in other states.
The input from the Region 5 calls is that we're all feeling that same frustration that you do. I mean, we're looking at the underlying, and Eric is, I think, addressing it too, the underlying concept of WIOA type services really should be for the most in-need youth, the ones who have the most barriers. But yes, recognizing that different populations have different barriers. The barriers that, and that's the point of this whole conversation, the barriers that I might see on my West and South Side Chicago program is completely different from what someone might see in whatever town Sarah mentioned earlier today that I'd never heard of. But yeah, the frustration is across the board. And what I typed was that I hope that bringing it up more and more frequently and addressing, especially the in-school youth need for taking a basic skills test, which is crazy. The more times we bring it up, the more likely it is the DOL might be able to address it differently. Somebody, Eric, are you attaching the TEAGL? Yes, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, just heartbreaking. If eligibility and documents and paperwork, I mean, this is the social service cry for since the dawn of time, that we spend too much time working on paperwork than we do with people. So finding that balance is just sometimes makes you cry. I get that.
And Kenneth, the WIOA eligibility framework, that's national. That's like a federal guideline, right?
Correct.
That's
Yeah,
what we're talking
but
about.
and I think Eric's attaching individual areas, and who else is on here from a county or from an AJC? The individual areas can tweak things. Yes.
One
Thanks,
thing I
guys.
was just going to jump in with, we've been doing a lot of work with DCO with recent JTED grants around for an in-school youth program. And I think there's two issues that kind of start to get difficult in that process. One is we had to kind of move off of this framework that we needed case management type notes for in-school youth, right? Because they're part of a school district that has counseling and other support services. And so and DCO was great about that, was willing to recognize the fact that the types of case management supports and processes you need for a student who's in a high school is different than an out of school opportunity youth. The other on the data side, and this is part of the work is Northern, we're kind of positioned uniquely in the state Illinois longitudinal data system framework, but we're able to actually get data sharing with districts to use data that are already reporting on their students for all the demographic and all the other characteristics. Like you shouldn't have to collect that separately because the state already has that through interagency work, and we can bring that together. So that's some of the work that we're setting up and breaking some ground where it's going to be a really targeted request from the districts for basically participation data. And then we're going to draw down all the data that ISB already has and get it to DCO for their reporting for all the other information you need for DCO grant programs. And, you know, I'm saying this seriously, as DCO gets so much federal funding in the upcoming years for manufacturing and all these other program areas, unless we figure it out, the ability to target in-school youth services is going to be extremely limited. So hopefully we can all break some ground together to really get through those issues.
John,
All
your
right.
success getting that data sharing with the school district, I think could really inform future movements working with the foster care system, corrections, all of that. So yay.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it back over to you because I know we only had about 30 minutes. I think we went a little over, but that's really the majority of that's all of our slides that we were going to cover. So I don't know if we want to open it to questions or what, but Sarah, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, that was great. I'll go ahead and put the PowerPoint back up. It's just guiding questions. We don't have to go directly with these. But yeah, now we're gonna open it up to you all to ask some more questions to Eric and Chris, or talk amongst each other about these barriers that or experiences that Chris and Eric discussed. So I have a question. And can you all see the group question and answer screen? Okay, great. What is the process that you all had to go through? Like, how did you learn the process to, be the facilitators for employers to recognize you said that you are the facilitators and register their programs under Skills USA. Like, how did you learn that process, or what was the resource you used in that journey?
Yeah, so really when Eric started talking a little bit about John Deere and the process that they were going through, part of the conversations we started having with their contact with the Department of Labor was how can we service these apprenticeships in the best way possible? And through that, they talked about apprenticeship intermediaries and navigators. So what we did is we went through the process of going through and becoming an intermediary. So we serve as a registered Department of Labor registered apprenticeship intermediary. I think that's the full title of the entire thing. So what we do is we have to, on one side, for the education that the student is receiving, validate the curriculum and training that they're going through. So we have a set standard that we have for every apprenticeship area. And we go through and we meet with that teacher, look at their curriculum, make sure that it's being taught at some place within the course sequence, and validate their curriculum. So their related technical instruction is what that's called on the Department of Labor side. Then on the employer side, we have a separate set of standards for on-the-job training. So we meet with the employer, we onboard the employer. There's some paperwork we have to fill out with the Department of Labor there as well, to get that employer registered with them. And then we then move forward with serving as an intermediary. So the employer hires the student, just like a regular employee or the participant. And then we go through, we meet with them. We have to do some initial intake with that student. The nice thing is the employers have typically just included that in their onboarding process with us. So it's, two online forms that the student fills out as they're onboarding with the company. They come in and meet with us, and we send some paperwork over for them to sign. Then monthly, we ask the student to report their hours back to us, and we report that to the Department of Labor. We also then once a month have either the student or the employer, it alternates each month, fill out an evaluation of how they're doing on the job site. So they report that data back to us. At the completion of their apprenticeship, then we validate that they've completed both their classroom instruction, their related technical instruction, and their workplace or on-the-job training to issue them that credential. So that's really the process start to finish. If you have questions on that, let me know. That was very brief, but that's the process in a nutshell.
Thanks, Chris.
And the one thing that I think Eric mentioned as well, anybody can do this. This isn't, most community colleges across the state are registered apprenticeship intermediaries as well. The one thing that we've seen that really helps us in this process is that we transcend where institution that they're at. So we go from, if they're going from high school to college, we can stay with them and track them through that process if that's what they're continuing to do. We also then are that conduit for the employer back to the school. So if there is a contact at the school that disappears, we typically have another contact that we can start working with. Same on the employer side. If there's a promotion and someone's not servicing that work-based learning program anymore, we typically have another contact in that company or have another company within the area that we can start moving those students towards. We work with about, in general for our conferences across the state, we work with about 650 employers. So we do have a large network that we can start working with as well.
One of the other unique opportunities or just things to address is like a union versus non-union conversation. So obviously union apprenticeship opportunities are only for students that are 18 years and older. But what we've seen actually, and this is at Caterpillar at their foundry, all the way to large construction companies to small construction companies that are union. We have employers that are creating agreements with their local union that says they can enter our registered apprenticeship program while they're 16 up until the age of 18. And then as soon as they're age eligible, the employer will sponsor that employee into the union apprenticeship. And the union apprenticeship will give credit back to the student for the number of years or the time or the competencies that they demonstrated while in our apprenticeship. So it's a great opportunity for our students to get a jump start on their union apprenticeship. And it's a great opportunity for the unions to have our natural recruiting tools. So we've seen that in several different areas. We honestly have had the initial conversation is always a touchy one with the union, but once they're on board and once they understand what we're doing, it's always been a very positive outcome. In fact, we've never had an employer that got negative feedback from the union to say not to do that, or where the union threatened that would be a grievance or any sort of issue. So another great opportunity of how we can interact or work together with union opportunities to get the students into some career opportunities early, even at union facilities. And then transition them into the union when they're age eligible.
So Eric, one question that I wonder about, and maybe this is a Chris question, but how are you spread across Illinois? I know you said you had 650 employers. One of my other worries and concerns is a rural community that doesn't have those employers. Are there virtual types of apprenticeships? I mean, how are we supporting those rural schools at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's our model right now is very centric around our network of employers that we serve. But we are seeing, as we're going into communities, even some of our rural communities, with a specific employer, as soon as that school district sees the success of getting a student into that apprenticeship program, even if there's not a ton of employers in the area, I'm sure there are some employers in the area, whether it's small mom and pop facilities, whether it's foundry, there are employers that can benefit from that program. And so we have not restricted that to any of our school systems once we go into that with a registered apprenticeship program, to say, if you have other employers in your area that can benefit from this, we'll have that conversation with them on how we can onboard them into this same program. So it's not a perfect answer, Marcy, because I don't think we have the solution for every rural community right now, nor do we have the capacity, quite honestly, to service all of those communities. But I do think, and what we have seen is, we've even went into a community where Skills USA was non-existent, but because the employer happened to be in a particular town where Skills USA wasn't existing, we now see that local high school is a part of the Skills USA program. We've now brought on, 6 other employers in that one community, all because one of our anchor partners happened to have a facility in that town. So we're seeing that slow, creep, as we get into communities take place. The other real opportunity that we're seeing right now, you mentioned virtual apprenticeships. While we don't have virtual apprenticeships, we do have some employers looking to hire remote-based apprenticeship opportunities. Now, that's kind of a scary topic for high school students, to be in a remote employment opportunity. But there are employers that are looking, especially in the community or customer service sector. So like DirecTV and Comcast looking to hire phone support technicians, like level 1 entry technicians. Those are very real opportunities that could be a widespread into some of those more rural communities. But we have to be very careful on those, because, again, especially in the first few years of an apprenticeship program, just like any internship program or anything, if you have a bad experience, or you happen to have a student that maybe takes advantage of a situation, that program is going to disappear very quickly within that employer. So we are doing a lot of vetting with our students and really what that experience is going to look like right off the bat, to make sure that we're setting our students up for the best success. So there are virtual opportunities that we are looking at, but I don't know how quickly we're going to roll those up, at least into our programming right now. The other thing to remember is apprenticeships are probably not for every student, right? So there's a whole lot of steps and a whole lot of experiences that high school students should get before they get to that apprenticeship piece. So, on-site work tours, job shadowing, those career exploration pieces are critical. But then as we start funneling that, as that funnel starts to tighten, I think that's the end goal, is really that capstone experience, is that registered apprenticeship piece. And right now, at least for our student members, we can't service every one of our members in registered apprenticeship programs, nor do I think we would be doing our employers justice if we did. We're really looking to find those students that are excelling and really want to get into the career field, and give them the opportunity to have that apprenticeship piece.
Eric, that's perfect that you said that, because I was sitting here thinking that a lot of this conversation has centered around those registered apprenticeships. And while I think they provide a lot of value, as you said, they're not fit for everyone. So do you see the same barriers with trying to obtain grant funding, or just in general when trying to provide just general work-based learning experiences for students?
Yeah, and honestly, the YCP grant that we're operating under is very much a career exploration, career awareness, ultimate leading to the career field. So that is a grant that was written specifically.
So that answers my earlier pre-apprentice work, right? Because a lot of that fits within that wheelhouse, right? As they're going through and learning some of those base skills. I love the fact that you're utilizing NCCE, our core, right? And that's something that can build no matter what you want to do within a lot of different fields.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that barrier exists across the spectrum from career exploration, pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, and beyond. Our focus, though, is really just around how we can support our employers getting our students into the workforce. So we are a little more narrow focused, probably, than what all of the grants would be looking at. But we are really focused on that capstone or that end user experience, just because we feel like that's where our employers have the most need and where we can deliver the most success to the employers with our students and where they're currently at.
Well, I think we're starting to run out of time, but I want to thank Eric and Chris. I mean, I myself learned a lot today. So thank you, Chris and Eric, for all of your, all the information that you provided. I'm sure that there'll be more questions. If you guys think of something else later, write those down, because again, I think Eric, you'll be at the October meeting in case there's more questions that come up. That we can address that as well, or again, we can look at an FAQ if you have more questions. Okay. Sir, next.
Thank you.
So the next point is that the next meeting dates to be determined. We'll do that via doodle poll because we are having homework hangout present on their out of school youth experience. What I can do in the meantime is Molly and I both took notes during Eric and Chris's great presentation of the barriers they mentioned, and we can just add those to the list back out to the group. And after Eric and potentially Amanda talk next month, we'll, have that the most comprehensive from our conversation list that we can start to prioritize where our group can make the most impact. That sounds good to everyone. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, looks like the chat's good. All right. And like Marcy mentioned, if you have any questions, send them on over and we'll do an FAQ and make sure to send the answers back to you all with the notes and the recording and things like that, and the doodle poll. And if that's that, ready to go?
Great. Yes. So thank you again for joining. And Craig, is there anything you want to add? I've talked the whole time. So
No, that's perfect. I like it that way, that I can just support. I think this is a great conversation and sets the stage so that we can make sure that we're taking a holistic approach, and really, I think Sarah framed it well, of then being able to look at what can we as a committee impact, because as a work group, we can't impact everything, right? We can't try to boil the ocean, but there might be one or two things that we can help move the needle on.
Yep. Great. All right. With all that, everybody have a great week, great month, and we will talk to you in October. And again, Eric and Chris, thank you so much for everything. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.